Hey folks, I know I'm late to the party, but in this video and the post I'm writing, I would like to go into some aspects of going all in with nullable reference types. So it's not something new, it came out last year with C# 8 and .NET Core 3.1, but only now I've been able to really use it instead of just playing a bit with it. So I've got some more insights on how we can leverage this to really help us get rid of those pesky null reference exceptions. For a very brief intro, nullable reference types basically help us by, like we do with nullable value types, for instance int nullable, it shows that the value may be null, so if we just use it without checking, we can get an exception. And also gives us that peace of mind that if a value is not marked as can be null, then we should be able to use it without problems and without null checks everywhere. So we have the two problems. Sometimes we don't check where we should, and other times we check where it's not needed. So this is what nullable reference types tries to introduce with C# 8. I am not going to go into more details, but I'm going to show how to enable it and some things I'm doing, as I said, going all in to take the best advantage, because just enabling it's good, but we can do more to really take advantage of this new feature in C# 8 and beyond. So let's go with a very basic example. Let me open Visual Studio. So we have this basic application with C# 9, so top level programs and all of that. And what we are doing is preparing a string, putting in a value, a null value, and then writing to the console the length. As expected, this will blow up with a null reference exception because we are using this is null. Of course, this is a very basic example. We see it's null, but maybe we get the value from somewhere else. Will we always check? Do we need to? So that's where nullable reference types come in. Now let's start by enabling nullable reference type. So let's go to the CS proj, when I find here, and over here, nullable enable. There are more options which enable it partially, but I won't really enable all the things. So now if we go back to the program, let's rebuild just because of reasons, and now we see we have warnings here because we are putting a null value in something that is not supposed to be null. And here, because the compiler is checking, not because of this string, otherwise it should be string interrogation mark, but because it's doing flow analysis and detecting that it's being assigned null here. So doing this solves this issue. This issue remains because it may be null, we need to check. So this is what just enabling nullable reference types does. Warnings. It gives us warnings. If we go here, we see we have warnings. Now, warnings are good, but for me it's just really not enough because we ignore warnings all the time. So one thing that's really not new and not specific to nullable reference types is just treat warnings as errors, so to avoid these kinds of things. Although not new, not everyone does it, and since we're talking about it, let's just take a look at a few ways we can do that. So one possible way is to use something called Rulesets. So new item, Ruleset, and it's doing stuff. Let's see, Visual Studio, okay, and we can, for instance, go here, look for null related errors. Let's see here, this is 8600, and this is 8602. So we could look here, it's warning. So error, error, error. We put these three, 8600 and 1 and 2. So this does nothing by itself. So now we can go to the CS proj and we add a line here just to reference that rule set. So this directory, rule set. And now we go here and we have an error instead. So with the rule set, we can change the severity of the things. So there were warnings, we put errors. So this is one possible way. If we now build it, it gives us error, so it won't run. Even if I try to go to the console, it should, yeah, build failed, so no dice. Another option, if you noticed while we were here, we have this pop-up saying migrate the rule set to an editor config. So we can write the editor config by hand, or we can just click this. So the editor config serves more purposes. The editor config, for instance, is where we can define like the code style to be used in the project. So everyone in the team follows the same style, and when you do auto format, it will format in the way that we want. We can even define the amount of spaces, tabs, stuff like that. And also we can use this. So let's create an editor config, save, and it's here. Over here it deleted the rule set, so we can also delete it from here. For instance, we now have the editor config, which is respected because it is in this folder. We could be on a previous folder, but it needs to be like in the context. So we can define more stuff, but right now what we have defined is the severities. So errors, so we go here and it's still the same, treating warnings as errors, these specific ones. If we, for instance, hide this one, we shouldn't get this anymore. Yeah, now this is a warning again, this is an error. So this is another option to achieve the same thing, and apparently the recommended, as we got that pop-up. And there's even more. Let's say I delete the editor config. So this is back to warning, but I can go here and do warnings as errors. And then I can say what I want. So CS 8600, CS 8601, CS 8602, save, go back here, and should be error, now it's error. Okay, so all similar approaches using different file formats, but all similar. But something I wasn't aware, which is great, is that instead of listing all the errors here, if we want to just enable errors for nullable reference types, we can write, let's see, delete this should go back to warning, and now I'll write nullable here. And if we go here, hopefully, now it's error. So this is the best way. I didn't know, so I was using namely the rule set. I didn't know about this, but this is much better, because with the rule set or the other approaches that we define all the codes, there are a lot of possibilities. But like this, we just say nullable and we get errors. So this is great. Now, one thing to keep in mind for all good that nullable reference types brings is that it's not a feature that has been there since forever, and it's optional, because it would be a breaking change to force this everywhere. So it's optional, and you need to be running the at least C#8 and all of that. So it gives us this peace of mind to get these kinds of errors, but we still need to take care about the edges. What do I mean by edges? I mean, for instance, even if you say that a string cannot be null. If you get a request from an API, there is no way to enforce that the client sending the payload doesn't put there a null. So for instance, it's JSON, you put there whatever you want. When it reaches our API, we need to check it may be null, so we need to do the normal validations. Besides that, not only that, but for instance, if we create a library, even if our library uses nullable reference types, it might be being used by an application that does not. So we might say that we don't expect a null in one place, but then it will be passed because the other application doesn't have those kinds of enforcement. So we need, in those cases, to still write guard clauses to check that an input is not null, some stuff like that. So in those places where our code interacts with other code that we don't control fully, we still need to do the required checks and assume it may be null even if we don't expect it to be null. And the same for libraries we might use. So let's say, for example, I created here a library on the side, and I created a static class, said, named I don't care about NRTs, which returns us as a method, get null, that returns a string with null. Now, this library doesn't have, if we go here to the edit, it's a .NET Standard 2, and it doesn't have nullable reference types. So it's oblivious. In our program, let's say, I don't care about this anymore, and we go here, I don't care about NRTs, get null dot length. And there's no error, even though over here we're returning null. But because we are using a library that is not annotated with nullable reference types, so we have no idea, and it may just happen things like this. So this is what we need to keep in mind. We have the peace of mind as long as it's within our code and enforcing things our way. But every time we interact with external code, unless we are sure that it's a library that we use and it's open source and we looked at it and it's using nullable reference types, if that's not the case, we need to assume that it may be not. Maybe it was done in C#7, or maybe the author doesn't like this new thing, don't know. So we need to take care. Otherwise, in our code, we can replace a bunch of guard clauses and null checks because it's our code, and if it's supposed to be null, we should mark it. If it's not supposed to be null, then we should state that with it's a string, it's not a string integration mark. Now, for another subject related to this is when we, let's imagine, it's at first glance it's not something we think about, but as soon as we start to use it for real, that's why when I was just playing I didn't really want to do a post because I didn't feel all the pains. But now that I'm really working with these things, some things become more apparent as you really use the feature. And it's sometimes, because we now mark it as can be null or not, we may, treating the warnings as errors or even having warnings will be sometimes annoying, because maybe in one place we know that it's not supposed to be null. So we can use the exclamation mark operator, but that feels a bit dirty to use too much. So sometimes it's good. Most of the times I used it, I put a comment saying why I used it. So we know why it's being done and it's not just me being lazy. But sometimes we can just, it would be nice if we could avoid to spread exclamation marks everywhere. So let's see an example. We have here, I'll paste here a class with an extension method. That's like I give it, it's an extension method over string, and it returns the first 3 letters. And now I'll create I'll use this thing. So basically, as you see, it's a string. It returns a string, a nullable string, because we don't know if we can get the 3 first letters. Maybe the string is not big enough to get the 3 first letters, and in that case this would be marked as null. But the thing is, we know that when we return, this is the common try get pattern we see a lot, like try pattern, for instance, int dot try parse. It's a common pattern. When it returns true, it means it works. It worked, so we are sure that, unless it's bad code, but assuming it's correctly coded, we are sure that the thing in here is correct. And in this case, we know that it should have a value. So we could, for instance, we know that it should have a value, so we can do this. But it gets annoying to be spreading these kinds of things. So there are other options. Let me go here, open the browser, where is it? Over here. And there are attributes which we can use to help us with this. There are more cases. This try get is just an example, but I'll focus on this one, but there are a bunch more attributes. But let's find try get. So you have over here, and you notice that we have this attribute here, not null when. So let's go back to Visual Studio, and let's put over here the attribute. Need to import something, and it's done. So the error is gone, and what you can see is that the attribute says not null. So this value will not be null when the return value, as we can see in the signature, is true. So within this if, we know that this is true, unless someone wrote wrongly. But if we go here and do a console write line first 3 letters dot length, over here we get the error because it may be null. We are not sure, but inside if we know because it's there. So in this case, we're telling the compiler a way to check things so it's less annoying. So every time we had to do this here, but every time we use the method now, we won't need to put a null forgiving operator or pragmas or whatever. So it simplifies things. So, and like I said, there are more attributes. This is just one example, but I won't go into all of them, which can help us in multiple situations. So to help us make code that the clients can use, so the well-behaving clients will get the best experience, but the bad behaving clients will have also a good experience, but we will be able to double check, so stuff like that. So it's pretty cool. Take a look at those docs. I won't go into all. This should be enough to explain why this is important and why it's helpful when we really start to use it, and if we got these errors, to make coding with this feature less of a pain. So when that does it for this video, and I will be finishing the post that's around the same subject, and I hope you folks enjoyed it and start to see the value of this nullable reference types feature. And I hope everyone starts using it, because if it becomes standard, it will be much better for, I think, everyone, and maybe we'll start having less null reference exceptions, those annoying things. It would be great, because those are one of the worst cases of exceptions, because you are like, okay, so where did it happen? It's really a pain. So I hope this really picks up and everyone uses it. Again, hope you enjoyed it, and hope to see you in the next one. See yous!